Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me today is a special treat. I have a spouse, a mom, an advocate for social change. And oh, yeah, she's directed a couple of films. And one especially, I think we may spend some time about. That's right. This is all about Ben like Beckham episode. No, 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 I'm kidding. Uh, Gurinder Chadha, welcome to the podcast.
Hello there, Justine. Nice to see you.
It is great to see you. So what? Give us your elevator pitch. What's? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My elevator pitch. Okay. Well, I'm British Indian. Um, love music. Love Bruce. Love Bungra. Um, and love people.
And I think that comes very clear in your films
Mm.
that you focus on, and I'm not saying anything unusual, unique, but you focus on stories about people which lead to bigger themes, and that's lovely. That's just so lovely. Well, I'm so glad you took some time to spend with me. But I always start at the beginning. Talk about where did you grow up and what kind of music did your family listen to?
Well, I grew up in West London, and I was actually born in Kenya in East Africa, and I came to England as a baby. And Kenya was a British colony.
Mhm.
And my family background is from the part of Punjab that was partitioned in 1947. You know, when India got her independence, the country was carved up, and a line went through Punjab, and Pakistan was created. And my ancestral background is on that side, on the Pakistan side.
Okay.
So when Kenya was getting its independence, my family ancestors didn't really have a home to go back to because it was now a different country. And so my father and mother decided to come to England. And so I was raised there and in West London. And my dad loved old Indian movies. So he used to sing a lot, and he used to sing a lot of songs from these old movies. And my mum was sort of more religious, but
Okay.
music wasn't a big thing for my mum so much, really. But my dad would love to they'd have these little parties and these gatherings, and then he would start singing. And then I started becoming aware of pop music, really. In the 60s. And I remember really, really liking Petula Clark and Downtown. That was a song that I absolutely loved. And I used to uh, put a pretend beauty mark on my chin like she had, and sing the song. And then I grew up through all that music. The Osmonds, they were huge. You were either a Jackson fan or an Osmond fan, when I was growing up. And then the music that really started speaking to me actually was reggae, and then um, also the Nile Rodgers sort of chic Sister Sledge type music. I loved that. I used to love also rock music as well, not sort of heavy stuff, but just like what one would, Peter Frampton kind of. I love Pete Seeger and I love Bob Seger. Um, I liked Bob Dylan. And so I had a very eclectic mix. My parents never really got into pop music. They were always into their own sort of film stuff.
Sure.
Um, but I had a Saturday job working at Harrods, and I was in the record department, and this is when I was still at school, and a guy there with long hair, he had long hair and a beard, and he said to me once, he said, "Have you ever heard of any Bruce Springsteen?" And I looked at him and said, "No, that's old people's music." And he handed me Born to Run. And I remember looking at the album and I opened it because it was like it was triple, and I was
Sure.
like, oh my God, this is a huge album. And what I loved was the image on it because it was Bruce, with the big man, you know, and together it was very unusual to see a black and a white man together, on an album, or anything, any bands. There were so few bands like that. The band I remember was Casey and the Sunshine Band.
Right.
Um, so that's what struck me was here was these two guys who were smiling and looked really close. And Clarence had a lot of presence, obviously, as did Bruce. And so I thought, okay, let me give it a go. So I took the vinyl home and I listened to it, and I was like, that was it, blown away. And then, I just sort of really started understanding the poetry and the lyricism of the songs. They were little stories, and they were like little movies. But it wasn't until the 80s. Now, I thought it was 85, but other people are telling me it was a bit later than that. But he played at Wembley Arena, and I remember going with some friends, and it just blew me away. It was so different listening to him and then seeing him play. And I was in the stalls, and we were on these plastic seats, and by halfway through the concert, everyone was standing up on their seats. And we were all jumping up and down. So that was the first time I saw him live, and I'm always drawn politically to the left. I always have been, because my whole political awakening was really about racism. After I first listened to Bruce, I got very much involved with the bands like the Specials, and people who were involved in what we called Rock Against Racism in Britain.
Yes.
And so I became very much a lover of music from the left. And with Bruce, though, he always was singing about the ordinary man. And when Ghost of Tom Joad came out, I that's when I it consolidated for me that he was a great artist. But then again, later, much later, when he did The Rising, again, I was like, wow, this guy he's like I don't know, he's a savior, the way he has so much humanity about him, and the way he writes his songs, but also when he chooses to do what he does, and how he uses his fame and his creativity to further the causes he believes in without it being really showy. I mean, the stuff he does for veterans, the stuff he does for all kinds of people. I mean, that's what I thought really, really drew me to him in those early days.
You know, one of the things you mentioned about seeing Clarence and Bruce on the album cover together, I am a, relatively speaking, late to the party of Doctor Who. It was I started, it was in the Tennant era, and I started with Eccleston. I've since back and seen a lot of classic Who, but watching the Russell T Davies era and the Stephen Moffat era, as a guy growing up in Louisiana, currently live in Texas, I I was amazed and pleased that the mixed race couples was just not a big thing in Doctor Who, right? Like in British TV, it has gotten better in America TV, in US
Yeah.
TV, but it just seemed, and that was something, and I think it's interesting that early, back then, even you felt that way. That
Yeah.
the bands. And by the way, I was on the Osmond camp. I wanted to be Donny Osmond. I wanted to date Marie Osmond. Um, I just was on a podcast about the Partridge Family, talking about Keith Partridge. So yes, and
Oh my God, love the Partridge Family.
yes, and I
Oh,
I I graduated high school here, in the States, that we call high school, in 1977. So Casey and the Sunshine Band and Peter Frampton Goes Alive, you were talking
yeah.
my childhood.
Oh my God, now I've got to go listen to the Partridge Family again. I
Yes.
think I love you.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But, yeah. I
So,
mean, the thing is
yeah.
that for someone like me growing up in Britain, I mean, we had a lot of racism in London. We had the rise of the right, with the National Front, as I've shown in Blinded by the Light,
Yes.
and so it was quite a terrifying time, because you had this sort of aggression on the streets, and you kind of never knew when someone was going to get jumped on. But also, there was this idea that the police were not on your side either. Um, and that's why this whole music movement took off, and the rock against racism movement took off, and it just basically said it's really uncool to be racist, basically. And it really made a big difference. It really, really did. And the more bands that got behind it, it was like a great outlet for people to say, well, Britain has changed. Britain is this, because these are kids who were born in Britain, raised in Britain, they're British. And so my very first film that I made was called I'm British, but dot dot dot. And so there were lots of talks about identity, at that time. And so for me, I was always looking for um, images of me or people like me on the screen or in the creative arts, and that's really why I became a filmmaker. I mean, I became a journalist first and then a filmmaker, and the idea was to create more stories that showed people like me.
Wait, and one of the questions I had for you, and um, did you started as a journalist, but did you always know that you wanted to be in the creative arts, to be either a writer, and what
No,
what
no,
what led you to
no.
being a filmmaker?
Well, I at school my favorite subject was geography,
Okay.
and I loved geography. I still love geography. I
Okay.
my pride, the pride of my collection was pride of my pride possessions was my rock collection,
Okay.
and I had rocks from volcanic rocks from an eruption from Mount Etna. I had quartz from North Wales. I mean, I had a rock collection that I lovingly varnished at one point. So
Yeah.
everything shined. Like, it was my pride and joy, this thing. And so I always thought I would do something to connect with geography. But as it happens, I ended up doing human geography and what we called then development geography or third world
Right.
economics and politics. Um, Interestingly, when I was at college, India and China were both third world countries, considered third world countries. So no one saw that coming back then.
No.
But but basically, it was during that I started becoming more aware of the role of the media in
Hmm.
telling stories and perpetuating stories and the power of the media. And so I thought, okay, I need to become a journalist so I can redress balances and tell authentic stories. And so I did a postgraduate diploma in journalism, and then I worked with the BBC for a while. But I never ever anticipated being a film director. I mean, that just people who were film directors didn't look like me.
Right.
And so it was really through journalism. And then from journalism, I went into TV. And then in Britain, this amazing thing happened. We, this music started coming off the streets, which was called Bhangra music. It was fusion. So Bhangra was a traditional kind of Punjabi celebratory dance and wedding music, and people started fusing it with pop and reggae and soul, and I was blown away by this because I finally felt like here was something that represented me. This was British fusion stuff. Um, I have I had an episode of that. I had a scene of that in Blinded by the Light,
Yes.
where we had these daytime discos. So that's what we used to do. We had these daytime discos, and it was that music that pushed me into wanting to make a film about it, and that's how I made my first film. And and it was ostensibly about the music, but it was also about being British and Indian. And then the nice woman Karen Bamborough, who used to run Film 4 at the time, which was Channel 4, and they made amazing British films like The Crying Game and lots of great British films. Um, she saw my short and said, "Oh, this is a new voice. We need to develop this voice." And she basically plucked me out and then helped me develop my very first feature, which was called Bargee on the Beach. And that's how I became a film director.
You know, one of the things I, when I heard that there was going to be a Blinded by the Light movie, I immediately went out and bought um, Mr. Manzoor's book, right? And I
Yeah.
read it, and I ended up sending him a tweet and telling him that I was really I've never had that struggle because I'm a short fat white guy, growing up in Texas or Louisiana and now in Texas, and I loved that struggle of I am British, but I am also something else. And you've
Yeah.
mentioned that a couple of times in your discussion, that in a lot of ways you have you a dual identity, and it's in both of them are just as important.
Yeah. Well, I really feel sorry for people who don't have languages,
Right.
who can't speak more languages
Yes.
or, don't have a whole other cultural heritage to reach into,
Right.
as well as, the what we call multiculturalism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wonderful being able to access so many different traditions and rituals, and it's very enriching. But when I was growing up, it was seen as a problem. It was seen as, oh, you don't know who you are. You've got an identity crisis, or you're confused about who you are.
Right.
And the kids, we never felt that, because we were always like, okay, well, we know we're this, we know we're that, and we have to negotiate it. And for so long, the West sort of saw it as a problem. But what people like me started doing, and Safraz, we would
Mhm.
say, okay, well, we are this, but we're also this. So how are we going
Yeah.
to negotiate it? But we would do it with affection. you know.
Yes.
Um, that's the most important thing. And I think with Safraz, Bruce was something else, meant something else to Safraz, yeah, in a much bigger way. And the reason Safraz and I connected is because he wrote an article in the newspaper about going to see Bruce, right? And he actually had this weird picture of him with Bruce or behind his
Yes.
line. And I got in touch with him and I said, I think we must be the two only Asians in Britain, who like Bruce.
Right.
We should get together. And that's how we met. And we've talked about this before, but he mentioned how struck he was that the album I kept quoting was Ghost of Tom Joad, because it isn't one of the obvious ones.
Right.
Wasn't Badlands or Born to Run,
Yeah.
and um, and so then when he wrote his book, um, he sent it to me, and I read it, and I said, okay, I know how to make this a really good film, because I'd made Bend It Like Beckham by then.
Yes.
So I said, I know how to do it. And I said, but we're going to need Bruce on side. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we'll never be able to make the film. Um, and then we were both sort of thinking, well, how are we going to get him on side? You
Yeah.
know, because we're going to need the music, for a film. And I've told this story before, you probably know it, but
Please. I was hoping you would share it. Yes.
yeah. So I got invited. So when he made the documentary about the making of Darkness,
Yes.
um, I got invited to the premiere in London. So, and I took Safraz with me. I said, "Come on, mate, let's go." And in true fandom style, Safraz stood on one side of the red carpet and I stood on the other side. So with cameras, so that when Bruce walked past, we would both click cameras so we could be in the same frame as
Yes.
Bruce.
Right.
So we're both standing there, and Bruce is walking down, and our hearts are fluttering. Oh my God, he's so cool. What a cool man. I remember that feeling right now.
Yeah.
As he had all black on, and as he walked round, he looked across the carpet and he looked at Saffraz. Now, at this point, Saffraz has followed this poor guy. He's
Yes.
been to like about 5,000 concerts all over
Yes.
Europe. And because Saffraz has got this huge sort of afro,
Yes.
he's very striking looking, and he always finds himself at the front of any concert. So
Right.
by now, Bruce knew that there was this kind of Pakistani kid that would turn up,
Yes.
in all these different places. And there was even a kind of like, huh? What are you doing here? Kind of
Right.
look, now and again. So when Bruce saw Saffraz, he walked over to him, and I was like, oh my God, get over there. So I ran across the
Yeah.
carpet, and we both carried on filming. And Bruce said, hey man, I read your book. It was really moving. And Saffraz was like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, that's so great, Bruce. We want to make a film about it. I made Bend It Like Beckham. I think we can make a great film, but we need your support. We need the music. And he went, sounds good. Talk to John. And John Landau was behind him.
Yeah.
And John Landau said, okay, what's all this about?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and Saffraz and I were going 10 to the dozen trying to explain to him everything. And and Saffraz had a copy of the book with him, and he gave the book to John. And we just said, right, this is what we want to do. Please, can you help us? And there was another woman there who's part of Bruce's team called Tracy. And Tracy was English, is
Mhm.
English. And so Tracy exchanged numbers with us and said, well, look, keep in touch. I'll keep an eye on this for you. And that was that. So then after that, we took photos with Bruce,
Yeah.
we were like just in shock, basically. But then the reality hit where we were like, okay, now we have to write a script
Yes.
that is worthy of Bruce,
Right.
and that became the challenge after that. We knew we had to write something so good that Bruce couldn't say no to.
Hmm. Um, the one of the things, and I actually reached out to, I have a very small Patreon group, and I asked my listeners, my guys, questions, and one of them I think is perfect. Um, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear you thought of it is you have to change the story, right? So two of the major differences is in the book, it talks about the death of his father and him meeting Bruce. I assume you took those out because you wanted to tell the story of this young man's journey, correct?
Yes, we couldn't, we couldn't, to cover all the ages in the book,
Right.
because it was too long. We had to take a moment, So
Yeah.
we decided to take the moment when he first discovers Bruce
Right.
and what that means to him, and then how he reconciles that with his father.
Okay.
So we kept the father alive,
Yes.
and we did toy with the idea that in New Jersey they meet Bruce and
Right.
stuff, but it just didn't feel right. It was much better that they dreamed of him, really.
So one of the things when someone reaches out to me, as they will be prone to do, and go, oh, I discovered this movie, Blinded by the Light. It's all about Bruce Springsteen. Jesse, have you seen this movie? And I'm like, duh, yes. And yes, I have. In fact, someone on Twitter last night said, oh, are you watching it for the first time? And I said, no, probably about the dozenth time, but yes. Um, and they will tell one of their favorite scenes is our young hero going to, the United States and going to Jersey. And I said, I love that scene, but what I love even more is the reality of, Sovereign's talking about going after 9/11 and that happened to him. The story that when he
Yeah.
was on there, he was so worried at being after
Yeah.
9/11 and doing that, and
Yeah.
to have someone greet him. So
Yeah.
I think that was a perfect thing. Um,
Yeah,
Andrew's
that
other,
was so
yeah,
lovely. That scene was so
oh,
lovely
it was
when
so lovely.
they're so nervous and everyone.
Yes,
And in the cinema, the first time I remember seeing the film in the cinema in the States, it was at
yeah,
Sundance, and
yeah,
it was a packed audience. And when that scene came up, I could hear people just going, oh man," knowing that there was some shit was going to go down.
exactly.
And then when the passport officials turn around and go, "You coming for the boss?
Yeah,
Hey,
I
why
can't
don't
think of
you
a
tell
better
us?"
reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I can't
actor
think of a
nailed
better
that part.
reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's exactly what they did say to them.
yeah,
The customs. That's exactly what they said,
that's
and
good.
the whole audience just cheered and clapped. It was such a release.
That's good. Andrew's
Yeah.
other question is, what songs were there any songs that were out of bound, and what did you think about when you were picking the songs?
Well, the great thing with Bruce was once Bruce read the script.
Yeah,
We got the script to him via Tracy. Tracy was a great help.
it
Without
sounds like it.
Tracy, this film would never have happened without Tracy. So Tracy really believed in it and loved the story, and so she pushed. And so she got the script to Bruce, and he obviously read it,
Yeah,
because because in the script, I put all the songs that we needed,
in your
we put
mind, like, okay, this song needs to be here and there.
Yeah, that made sense. And there
Yeah,
were lots of other songs that we didn't put in, that are wonderful songs, but they didn't fit our story.
yeah,
And so I didn't want to be gratuitous about it. Um, and and but there were like 20 songs in there, you know.
yes, exactly.
So it's not like, but when Bruce came back after when Tracy came back to us after Bruce had read the script, he basically said to her, give them what they want. You know, it's a great story. Give them what they want. And she said she thinks that Bruce liked the script a lot because it wasn't about him.
Yes,
It wasn't his story. It wasn't about him, and the cultural connection of someone living, 3,000 miles away, from a totally different background,
yeah,
saw saw what he said. I think that meant a lot to Bruce. But also, there's a lovely story. There was one song that I really wanted to use, which was Jungle Land,
right,
because that is probably my favorite song. Although that changes all the time.
sure,
But but I just love the operatic quality of Jungle Land.
yeah,
And I knew that I wanted to use the sax solo over those scenes with the right wing sort of
yeah,
marching, because the sax solo for me has this kind of almost, otherworldly quality, and so it just transcends the reality. So I was trying to show this sort of scene of hate, people with like horrible, sort of rigid with hate faces, with this beautiful, sax music over it. And lyrically, the song is very specific, so it is very hard to make the lyrics work, except for the last verse.
yes,
Um, but I, who was I to edit Bruce's song? Oh my god!
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like I was like, oh, how am I going to make this work?
Y-
So I was lucky enough to go and see him on Broadway,
right,
um, and after the show, I was standing in the little room, and he came out, and everyone was like, no one kind of knew quite what to say. And then I went up to him and said, we're working on the script, we're really excited. And he goes, yeah, cool, that's great, that's great. And I said, but I have a question I'd like to ask you. And I said, I really want to use the song, but I need to edit the two sections together.
yeah,
And I described the scene the right wing, and I described how what Clarence's solo made me feel like, and how I wanted to use that, and the verse at the end, and I described it in great detail. And Bruce was like just all ears. He'd just done this show, but he was just really focused. And I said, "Do I have your permission to do that?" And he looked at me and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I think Clarence would have really liked that." And do it for the big man. He went like, and he looked up, and I was like, "Oh my God, can
I
I
gotta tell
clap?"
you, I am tearing up right now. I am
Yeah.
tearing up right now just
I
hearing
mean,
that story.
what a
Yeah,
response. It's just, he
yeah,
just said Clarence would have loved it. Do it for the
yeah.
big man.
Oh, that's awesome. Um,
Awesome.
one other question for my that my guy sent in. John wanted to know, how do you explain Bruce's fan appeal across outside of the US? What about his message speaks across multiple cultures? And I realize that's a big question, but I'd love to
No,
hear
but
your
it's a simple
thoughts.
answer. It's a simple answer.
Okay.
See, rock music is generally seen as sort of American, right? Rock and
Right.
roll,
Yeah.
and British maybe, but
Yeah. Sure.
rock stars are kind of like Americans, and so every country around the world recognizes rock music in that way,
Yeah.
right? And I think that most rock music is about promoting that sort of rock and roll world, whereas Bruce's music is very rock and roll, the but lyrically and story wise, it's very universal. You
Yeah.
know, and it's full of empathy and humanity, and it's not like, hey man, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all
Right.
that. It's very truthful, and I think and so you relate to it. Whoever you are,
Yeah.
whichever country you're from, if you're having a bad time finding a partner, or if you've broken up, or if you can't get a job, or if you don't feel good
Yeah.
with your life, or if you come from a small dead end town and you want to get out of that town, and you know all those things, it's completely relatable. I mean, all music's relatable, but I think Bruce's music goes that little extra way, where even though it's kind of feels and looks like that American rock and roll
Yeah.
thing, it's actually incredibly relatable, which is why I think you have so many diehard fans all over the world who treat him like a savior and as a saint, because they've grown up together. They've grown up as.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. Going to a Bruce concert is a lot of old guys there. That's for sure.
Well, and that's actually one of the things I'm so glad you joined me, not only because of your brilliant career and your fandom, but t- someone tweeted that, why don't people ever have female guests on their podcast? And I started looking, and based on my based on Bruce's fandom, and I mean this with all love in my heart, I've got a lot of old white guys that have joined me, right? And I'm an old white guy. I will turn 63 this year. So I specifically reached out to, I have, kind of a mailing list, and I said, I'm looking for different voices. I want more um, people of of different genders, maybe non-binary. I would love some different ages, some different, uh, races, and I'm trying to get that out there. And I will always have the 50-something white guy sports reporter that it's mandatory. If you're in the East Coast and you write sports, you like Bruce. But so I'm glad you're able to join me, and I'm glad you were talking about that.
Yeah,
Um,
but that's okay. You know
yeah,
what? It is what it is, and that's
yeah,
okay. And one of the funniest things about making Blinded by the Light
yeah,
was the amount of young people who came and
right.
said, "Oh, I've come because my dad loves Bruce," kind of thing.
Yeah,
And then they came because of their dads. And then they're
yes,
like, "But man, he's really good."
right.
Yeah. So I think we brought a lot of new fans to Bruce, I hope,
I
under
I
the
hope
age of
so too.
20.
Um, I I was at a convention and John Cusack was there, and
Oh,
I stood in line, and one of the things I do instead of collecting, buying people's autographs, I have a wonderful friend named Tom Zoller, and so he will do a caricature of the celebrity I'm going to meet. And so he did one of John Cusack in the Beach Boys striped shirt because he was
oh
in Love
yeah,
and Mercy, right?
yes,
And so I had him sign that. And I told John how much Love and Mercy meant to me because
yeah.
Brian Wilson was my first musical obsession. Then I discovered
Oh,
Bruce. And so now then I love them both equally. And and he looked at me and he said, Brian loved the film, and that's all I needed. So I asked that, was that similar to y'all's thoughts that when Bruce said, I love the film, you're like, I hope it's successful. I hope it is, but really that's almost enough.
oh my God, so you so don't know. You at one
Yeah.
point you have to. You, yeah, I had to forget about Bruce when I was
Yeah.
making the film and just make the film that I wanted to make
Right.
and hope that Bruce came along with it.
Right.
Because if I kept looking over my shoulder, going, "Oh, will Bruce like this? Won't he like this?" I would never have been able to be free of that to make the film.
Exactly. That makes
Which
sense.
is which is why I was able to put a couple of those those Bruce deprecating jokes,
Right.
like one of my favorite lines is when Jarvid and his friend are meeting and
Yeah.
going out, and he quotes "Born to Run" to
Yeah.
him, and his friend says, "Did you write them lyrics? I
Yeah.
told you they were rubbish."
Yes,
Like,
exactly. It doesn't even rhyme.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
What I
like
did love that.
one of the greatest songs ever.
Yeah. Well, what
And then
I go ahead,
yeah,
please.
go on, no, go on, go on.
No, what I was going to say is one of the things my wife is a casual fan at best, and she
Yeah,
certainly gets tired of hearing me talk about Bruce. But she loved about the film is she says it shows the good and the bad of becoming a new fan, the
yeah,
excitement, but then it's everything is Bruce. And all of a
yeah,
sudden and that is, I don't want to say unhealthy, but you need that perspective, right? And you showed that
yeah.
well in that film. He will always be passionate. Javi will always be passionate about Bruce, but he's learned how all things in moderation to a certain degree.
Yeah, but also as a commercial filmmaker,
Yeah.
I also wanted to make sure that people who were the misguided saddos
Yeah.
who weren't Bruce fans,
Right.
would still like the movie.
Yes.
Um, so I needed to keep that balance in check there.
Yeah.
But watching the film with Bruce, so what
Yeah.
happened was before I finished the cut,
Yeah.
I insisted that I had to show it to him, like before we signed off on it, I wanted to show it to him to make sure that how I'd use the music, how I'd use the gags, that the whole gag, for example, with when the market trader dad, Rob
Yeah.
Brydon, when he looks at the picture of Bruce and says, "Oh God, what's his name?"
Billy Joel
Uh,
or no,
uh,
no,
Billy Joel,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
He says, yeah. He says,
yeah.
is that Billy Joel? Like all that, it's close to the bone, So I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure. And so we arranged. I came to New York, and Bruce was on the show,
Hmm.
and we arranged a little screening room, and so we all went. So it was basically me, Tracy, John Landau, Barbara, and George were there. That it was his tight team. We're all sat there, and I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh my god!"
Yes.
Oh, and I was very, very nervous, I have to say. And then Bruce sort of shuffles in, and I go, "Oh, hello," kind of
Yeah.
thing. And then I go and sit in the back, while Bruce sort of sits right in the front, in the middle, and then he goes, "Okay, let's watch the movie," kind of thing. So the movie starts, and I'm like so nervous that I think, oh, I can't sit in the back, I've got to go forward. So I went and sat sort of diagonally behind Bruce so I could see
Yeah.
his expressions.
Right.
And as the movie played, I saw him just kind of like, he was like a kid. He was smiling,
Yeah.
he laughed at some of the gags. Then it all got very heavy, of course, with all
Hmm.
the racism and stuff.
Yeah.
And so he was like, yeah, where is this movie going? I could see he was like,
Yeah.
it wasn't what he was thinking. And
Yeah.
then the self-deprecating gags, he absolutely laughed at those. The Born
Sure.
to Run one, he thought was so
Yeah.
funny. When he said, "Did you write those lyrics?" He thought that was hysterical. And then, and then the end, he was quite moved, but I didn't know completely because I could see his face was going, "Where are we going here? Where are we going here?"
Yeah.
And obviously, the way I used his music was so different, to the way he uses
Yeah.
he the way he does it on in his concerts. So in the end, um, the mu- the film finished. There was utter silence. Silence. The only gasp in the auditorium was Barbara, his manager, when the dad tears up the tickets to the concert.
Yeah.
Barbara gasped and went, "Oh my god!" Like this.
Yes.
But everyone else was trying to be quiet to let
Right.
Bruce, enjoy it. Anyway, at the very end, there was absolute silence because no one knew what Bruce felt and thought. And so I sort of went to the front to turn the lights on to get my DVD out of the player. And then
Hmm.
I was going to go outside because I thought, let them have some words. And as I went to the front and turned the lights on, I saw him get up and walk towards me. And I turned round and he put his arms around me and he kissed me on the cheek. And he said in my ear, he said, "Thank you for looking after me so beautifully. Thank you." And that's when I sort of melted and my legs
Sure.
gave way.
That's
No,
awesome.
but then we all sat down and he just kept saying, great job, and then everyone asked questions, and I mean, it's all a bit of a blur now. I wish I'd recorded it all, but what I remember was Bruce was like, Bruce and John got into a big discussion about Tiffany, because
Yes.
I think
Hmm.
we're alone now.
Yeah.
And he was like really pissed because when that song was out and number one, Bruce couldn't get arrested.
Yeah.
He just couldn't get a hit in the
Yeah.
chart. And that brought it all back for him with that song.
That's
So the
awesome.
two of them were sitting there going, "God, that girl, man, she was number one, and I couldn't get arrested." Like, so that was their kind of one thing that they were really going on about. But he really loved the kind of the politics of it. He said that,
Yes.
politics of it. He liked that it was blue collar as well, obviously, and that we got the Stone Pony in,
Yeah.
um, and the Jersey Freeze and things like that.
Yeah.
It was very sweet. He loved that
Yeah.
it was so affectionate, I think,
Uh,
And then what was great then was when the, at Sundance, when the film played to that
yeah.
massive audience and huge standing ovation. I mean, it was the most incredible screening of my life. That um, people were starting to call him. People started calling him because Barbara was with us and
Yeah.
spoke to Bruce and she said, "Matt, his phone was going off the hook and everyone was just congratulating him and, saying what a great job he'd done." And do you know what? What goes around comes around. We were a small independent British movie, not a huge budget.
Yeah.
And Sony, really worked with us because Bruce worked with us. And so we were able to afford those songs, Bruce
Yeah.
helped us basically. So, the love that came back to him,
That's
for being
awesome.
so generous with us.
Yeah.
It was enormous. I
Uh,
think people like Tom Hanks
yeah.
and all like loads of people just like were just going, wait,
Yeah.
and I seem to remember there was some conversation with Billy Joel as well because of that gag.
Yeah. That's funny.
Um, yeah, but I think people were sort of starting to question, well, where's their legacy project? Because
Uh-huh.
it's a legacy project right
Yeah.
now, for Bruce, that's there forever. Whether you're a
Yes.
Bruce fan or not a Bruce fan,
Yeah.
here's a film that really captures how important he is and his music is to a kid, blue collar kid growing up on the other side of the world, of Pakistani origin. And it's like, it just shows the reach of his music, and his talent. And it's encapsulated now. I mean, there'll always be documentaries and, about artists, and you'll always have that.
Yeah.
But those are different. This is a very different kind of charming. I mean, it's a very different way to appreciate who you are. It's like me, there's this lovely young artist in Canada, um Jagdeep Sena, his name is, and he is Jagdeep Rayner, sorry. And
Okay.
he is a painter, and he saw my first film, the one I was mentioning earlier
Yes,
about
ma'am.
and he just did a whole bunch of drawings of stills from that documentary. And then he came to England on a scholarship for something, and I went to meet him. And then he did a whole bunch of other pictures of work of mine and me, just because of what my work meant to him.
Hmm.
And it's just wonderful. I mean, he's obviously a different generation to me; he's much
Yeah.
younger, but it's so lovely for me to see how much I mean to that painter and how he's encapsulated it into his work. So that's a small thing for me. I think for Bruce, it's a wonderful thing, and he therefore, we wanted to do a premiere where Bruce would come, and
Yeah.
celebrate the film with us. So we started thinking about doing it in New Jersey, and we were really happy to do it in New Jersey because we wanted all his people to come
Right.
and celebrate. We wanted Bruce fans and people who've grown up with him and stuff. So we did it in New Jersey, and it was touch and go. We didn't know if he was going to come or not. And then of course he not only came, he played a set as well.
Which,
And
oh, I'm sure
oh, it was magic,
it was
absolute
magic.
magic. Yeah.
I you've been very kind with your time. Just a couple questions and I'll let you go.
Sure.
I'm a huge Marvel fan, so seeing Haley Atwell, I thought the whole cast was great, but any stories about working with Haley Atwell? Because I'm like, oh, it's Agent Carter. It's Agent Carter. His teacher is Agent Carter.
But wasn't she Agent Carter after Blinded by the Light?
Probably, or maybe right
Yes.
around, but yes, but in
Right
my mind,
around,
yeah, yes.
yes. Because I didn't know she was a Marvel person at that point.
Yeah,
Um, Haley is a fantastic actress, and she just loved the script and what it
yeah,
represented. That was the thing for her. She just was like, "Oh my God, what an amazing script! I'm in." And her scenes were, we shot them all pretty quickly.
yeah,
Um, but when she saw the finished film, she sent me such a sweet message. Because she didn't realize how powerful it was going to be. She said, as an actor, you do your scenes, you hope for the best, and you go away. But she said it's such a powerful film that and even though her part was small, she's so glad she did it because she didn't realize, just how powerful it was going to be.
if you're lucky, if you're blessed, you have a teacher like that sometime in your life that
Absolutely.
sees more in yourself than what you see in yourself. And so
Yeah,
I thought that was really well done. The whole cast is amazing. Your lead is, he is just such a handsome, charming lead. Nell, I thought was just incredibly charming, and you could
Yeah.
see how he would fall in love with her, and you know, and Java's father, he it's easy for the way you could have written this, he could have been the villain in the piece, but he wasn't. It truly was Independence Day, to bring it back to Bruce, right? Two
Yeah.
people that love each other and just don't know how to say it to each other.
Well, when we were writing the script, Bruce had written his book,
Yeah.
and so we had that as well. And of course, that's another reason why I think the film meant so much to Bruce was because it
Yes.
was a father-son story,
Right.
And thank God that Bruce's father drove to see him and they
Yes.
had a beer. And thank God he was able to say, I wasn't a great dad,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Thank God, because without that reconciliation, it would have been tough,
Yes, it would have
and
been.
and so that sort of mirrors the film, in that
Yes,
respect.
it
And
is.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because even now, so much of Bruce's songs, there's so much melancholy about them.
Yes.
Even when they're joyous, there's
Yes.
still something that is like, no, I just can't quite let go and get into that happy zone.
So I have two stories to tell you. One, my wife was sweet enough to send me to New York, so I was able to see it on Broadway, right? And
Yeah,
when it came out on Netflix, I couldn't wait for her to watch. And we got to the part where she was talking about his father. He was talking about his father, and my wife looked at me and said, "This is too depressing. Turn it off." Now, right almost afterwards, as Bruce said, "Okay, I'm going to get you off suicide watch," and so he knew that was coming on.
yeah,
Yeah, I just love that. Um, we we love. I have a good friend who served a lot of years in the Navy, and he can't watch a submarine movie without seeing all the mistakes, right?
yeah.
So I want to tell you, there was about a dozen of us all in Dallas that had been on my podcast. We go see the film, and we are just sky high. Yet all of us, because we are such jackasses, you know, he quoted the river, but he didn't give him the river CD, the cassette. And I said, well, yes, that's because Javed went to the local record store after having Born in the USA and Born to Run. He went and bought the River cassette. That's a deleted scene. So, but we all were talking about it. We could not resist, right? We were all like, wait a minute. And so I just wanted to share that story with you about us.
Well, do you know what? Yeah, I agree with you. I'm always doing that with movies. I'm always looking
Yeah.
at continuity and stuff. So that is a classic, yeah, mess up there. We did mess up there.
Well, I don't think it was mess up. I think it was it. I think don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. All right, you have been way too kind on your time. Is there anything that you're working on you want to promote?
Um, well, no, nothing to
Okay.
promote. Just to
Okay.
say, I really appreciate all the love from the Spring Nuts community. I have it there on Twitter, and
Yes.
and it was great to share the premiere with so many of you. I
Yes.
still have that photo with everybody.
Yes. I wore my
And
spring nut shirt specifically
I
to show you
see
the
that.
love. Yes.
I see that,
Yeah.
and I just think that if everybody in the world was a Springsteen fan, for the right reasons,
Yeah.
boy, would it be a great world, wouldn't it?
Just a couple weeks ago, I was so proud. Jeff Smith, who is a member of Parliament from the Manchester district, joined me on the podcast, and if you Google him, he quoted Springsteen in his acceptance speech when he was first elected to Parliament. And I said the world would be a lot better if a lot more politicians, quoted Bruce. All right, we're going to end it up with the way I always end. Um, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher. He recently retired. He has a new book out, Bedtime Stories for the Living. But he would spend 2 days with his honors English class breaking apart Thunder Road. They would treat it as a poem. They would look at the imagery, the lyrics, what Bruce's the themes he was exploring. At the end of the two days, he would ask, "Does Mary get in the car?" Gurinder, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
I really, really want her to get into the car,
Yes.
but I think she, in the end, is kind of too scared to get in the car. And I say that because the song has this melancholy side to it where the protagonist is trying to make her, but inside he knows she's not going to.
All right. That's about, I have a 60-40 split. About 60% say she says gets in, but a good 40% says she doesn't. So
Mm.
that's great. Thank you so much for your time. This was so
Thank
sweet of
you.
you to send a Sunday afternoon. If do you want to give your social media handle? How to find you
Yes,
on Twitter?
Twitter, I'm Gurinder C, Gurinder, capital C.
Yes, check out. I know everyone listening to this has watched Blinded by the Light, Bended by Beckham. Check some of your other films. Thank you so much. Stay safe during these crazy times. It is so scary what's going on in the world right
Very,
now, and
absolutely.
so I continue to keep working for justice the way you are. Continue to keep working to make the world a better place, and I hope to see you in a show live someday.
Definitely, definitely. I'm waiting for
That's it.
Bruce to come back to England.
Yes,
I'm there.
indeed. All right. Thank you,
All right.
listeners. Go get vaccinated. Go get boosted. Be kind to each other because that's how we're going to get through this. Thank you all. Goodbye. And we're out. Thank you
All right.
so much. I hope you had
Thank you,
fun.
Jesse. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. That was great.
All
Let me know
right.
when it goes out
I
and
sure
we'll tweet
will.
the hell out of it.
Thank you.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Take care, mate. Bye bye.
Bye.